Grandmother's name was on the check. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not my brother's name, not a joint account, not some vague e-transfer with no paper trail. Her name, Grandma Cecile, printed right there on the memo line of a certified check for $1,800, dated the 14th of every single month, going back to September of 2020. I was sitting at her kitchen table in Sudbury when I found out. It was a Sunday. She'd made her butter tarts, the ones with the runny centers that she refuses to give anyone the recipe for, and she was pouring tea when she said it. Just like that. Casual. Like she was telling me the weather. I've been sending you money every month since you started nursing school, sweetheart. $1,800. Your brother said you needed it for rent. I put down my mug. I don't know why the first thing I thought about was my third shift of the week, the one I'd been picking up at the Tim Hortons near my residence because I couldn't make my lease payment without it. I've been doing double shifts twice a week for 2.5 years. I thought about the ramen. This specific brand of no-name ramen from No Frills that I'd eaten so often I still can't smell it without my stomach turning. I thought about the winter I wore 2 pairs of socks inside my boots because I couldn't afford to resole them, and the cold came right up through the floor of the bus. Grandma, I said, what money? She set the teapot down very slowly. What do you mean, what money? The $1,800, every month. I set up the transfers myself. Your brother gave me his account number because he said it was easier to send it through him since you were moving around with school placements. I heard a sound in my own head. Not quite ringing. More like the kind of silence that has weight to it. He said it was easier to send it through him. Yes. He said you were busy and it was simpler. I was 22 when I started nursing school at Laurentian. I'd gotten in on my own. No connections, no help with the application, just me and 4 years of biology grades and a letter of intent I rewrote 11 times. My parents were proud, technically. My brother, 3 years older, already working in finance downtown, already engaged to a woman who wore white to other people's weddings. He'd offered to help me navigate the administrative side of university life. I thought that meant taxes, OSAP, maybe finding a good bank account. It meant controlling every single financial lifeline my grandmother tried to extend to me. I need you to understand what those years actually looked like, because the story doesn't work without it. I was a nursing student in a mid-sized city with no family nearby and no financial cushion. My parents were in Ottawa. My OSAP covered tuition and about 60% of my living costs in a good month. The rest was on me. I waitressed on weekends. I did overnight shifts at a gas station for 8 months before the owner sold it. I applied for every bursary my school offered and got 2 of them. I wore my scrubs until the knees went thin and then wore them some more. My grandmother knew I was struggling. Of course she knew. She's the kind of woman who notices when you've lost 5 pounds and asks if you're eating enough and actually listens to the answer. She'd built her own life from nothing. She came to Ontario from a small town in Quebec in 1974 with $100 and a suitcase and spent 40 years working as a bookkeeper until she retired. She had savings. Not a fortune, but real savings. Careful savings, the kind that come from decades of knowing exactly where every dollar goes. She wanted to help. So she called my brother because he was the responsible one, the one already in finance, the one who knew how to handle things. She asked him to set it up. He said he would. He gave her his account number and told her it was a joint account, mine and his, and that it was easier this way because I was busy and he'd make sure I got it. She sent $1,800 every month from September 2020 to March 2022. I never saw a cent of it. I found out later, much later, in a way I'll get to, that the amount wasn't random. $1,800 was exactly what she calculated I'd need to cover the gap between my OSAP and my actual rent, groceries, and transit costs. She'd done the math herself. She'd looked up the average cost of a 1-bedroom in Sudbury, factored in food, transit, a small cushion for textbooks. $1,800 a month, clean. She'd set up the automatic transfer and assumed I was receiving it and just didn't talk about it, because that's how she is about money. Private, dignified. Not the kind of person to expect gratitude in the form of constant updates. My brother. I'll call him exactly what he is, because I'm done softening it. My brother took $57,600 from our grandmother over 2.5 years and told her it was going to me. He and his fiancée bought a condo in Kanata in 2021, cash down payment of 40%. I remember him showing me photos on his phone at Christmas that year, so proud. Finally got into the market, smiling like a man who'd worked for something. I smiled back. I was wearing a sweater with a hole in the sleeve. The dinner where everything came apart happened in April, Easter Sunday. My grandmother hosts every year. It's a big deal. The whole family, the butter tarts, the ham, the specific tablecloth she only uses for holidays. I drove up from Sudbury, which I was still living in after graduation, because I'd taken a position at the hospital there. I'd been a registered nurse for about 8 months by then. I was finally starting to feel like I was finding solid ground. My brother and his wife were already there when I arrived. His wife had gotten a blowout. He was wearing a blazer. They brought a bottle of wine that I know from working in a restaurant costs at least $90. My grandmother hugged me at the door and then held my face in her hands the way she does and looked at me for a long moment. "You look thin," she said. "I'm fine, Grandma." "Are you eating?" "I'm a nurse. I know how to eat." She made a sound that meant she didn't entirely believe me and went back to the kitchen. Dinner was normal for a while. My uncle talked about his boat. My aunt asked about my job. My brother talked about the condo. They were doing renovations, new kitchen cabinets, heated floors in the bathroom. His wife showed photos on her phone. They were beautiful. I'll give them that. Really beautiful. About halfway through the meal, my grandmother put down her fork. She didn't raise her voice. She never raises her voice. She just stopped eating and looked at my brother and said, "I want to talk about the money I'd been sending Vivienne. My name is Vivienne. That's me. I'm Vivienne." My brother's jaw shifted in a specific way. If you know him, you'd have noticed it. I noticed it. "What about it?" he said. "I want to make sure it's been going through properly. I talked to my bank last week about something else, and I was looking at my statements and I realized I've never gotten a thank you. Not once. Not that I need one. You know I don't need one, but it made me wonder if something went wrong with the transfers." "Everything's fine," my brother said. "Vivienne gets it. She's just not great with that kind of thing." "Right, Viv." Every person at that table looked at me. I want to tell you I had a speech ready. I want to tell you that I'd known this was coming, and I had bullet points and evidence, and I delivered it perfectly. I didn't. I just said, "I've never received any money, Grandma." The table went very quiet. My grandmother looked at me, then at my brother, then back at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've never received any money from you. Not a single transfer. I didn't know you were sending anything." My brother laughed. It was a short practice laugh, the kind designed to make the other person feel like they're being dramatic. "Viv, come on. Don't do this." "Don't do what?" "I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but this isn't the time." "The account number," my grandmother said. Her voice was very controlled. "I've been sending it to the account number you gave me. The joint account." "Right," my brother said. "And it's set up so the transfers go to Vivienne." "Show me," my grandmother said. "Sorry." "Show me. On your phone. Show me the account. Show me that the money has been going to your sister." My brother's wife said, "I don't think this is appropriate dinner conversation." "It is my money," my grandmother said, and there was something in her voice that closed the conversation down completely. "And I would like to see where it has gone." My brother did not show her his phone. What he did instead was what I've come to think of as the move, the thing he does when he's been caught at something and needs to reframe it, so he's the reasonable one. He sat back in his chair, spread his hands out on the table, and said, very calmly, "I've been managing Vivienne's finances for her because she was overwhelmed in school. I'd been covering her expenses, and the transfers were going into a savings account I set up on her behalf. It was meant to be a gift when she graduated." He said it like he prepared it. He probably had. "A savings account?" my grandmother repeated. "For her future. I wanted to help. In your name." "Technically, yes, but you took my money," my grandmother said, "and you kept it. That's not $57,000. I remember the number hitting the table like something physical." She said it like she already knew the exact figure. She'd calculated it, of course she had. She was a bookkeeper for 40 years. "Grandma, I can explain. You gave me an account number. You told me it was a joint account. It was your account. You transferred my money I sent for your sister, into your own account for 2.5 years. She paused. "That is not a misunderstanding. That is theft." My brother's wife started to say something about intentions and family and how these things are complicated. My brother tried to pivot to talking about how much he'd done for me over the years, how many times he'd given me advice, how he'd co-signed something once. I don't even remember what. I was barely listening. I was looking at my grandmother. She had a folder on the chair beside her. I hadn't noticed it when I sat down. She reached down and placed it on the table. I've been to see a lawyer, she said, last week after I looked at the statements. She opened the folder. Inside were printed bank records, highlighted. Every transfer going back to September 2020, each one showing her account, his account, the dates, the amounts. Beside them were printed records from his bank. I don't know how she got them, but she had them, showing those deposits and then what happened to them. Renovations, furniture, a weekend in Whistler, the down payment. The lawyer has already sent a letter, she said, to your bank and to his. She looked at my brother. You have 30 days to return what you took. If you don't, I've instructed her to file a civil claim. You're serious, my brother said. I have been serious my entire life, my grandmother said. This is not new information. His wife stood up from the table, knocked her wine glass, didn't catch it. Red wine across the white holiday tablecloth, and she didn't even look at it. She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair and said, "We're leaving." And my brother followed her, and the door closed behind them, and the room was completely silent. My uncle was the first one to speak. He said, "Well, I'll have more ham." I laughed. I don't know why. It just came out. My grandmother reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have sent it directly to you. I trusted him because he was your brother. I won't make that mistake again." You don't have anything to be sorry for. I do. I should have checked. I should have asked you. I assumed. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, really. She'd been sending money into a void for 2.5 years and assuming I was fine because the transfers went through and she didn't want to make me feel watched. And I'd been working double shifts and eating no-name ramen and telling myself this was just what it meant to build something from nothing. $57,000. I've done the math on what those years would have looked like. The shifts I wouldn't have had to pick up. The boots I could have resold. The February I was so broke I couldn't take the bus and walked 40 minutes to my clinical placement in -22 weather because I needed the bus money for groceries. I wore thin gloves that day and couldn't feel my fingers for an hour after I got there. $57,000. The civil claim proceeded. My brother hired a lawyer and tried to argue that the transfers were a gift and that he'd been acting as a financial manager with implied consent. The lawyer my grandmother had hired, a small, precise woman in her 60s who my grandmother described as very thorough, which is what you want, dismantled that argument fairly quickly because there was no documentation of any agreement, no evidence that I had ever consented to anything, and records showing that the money had gone directly into his personal account and been spent on personal expenses. He settled. He didn't want to go to court. I don't blame him. The paper trail was damning, and a judge would not have been kind. He settled for the full amount plus her legal fees, paid out of the equity in the Kanata condo. My grandmother put that money into an account in my name. She handed me the bank card at her kitchen table over butter tarts. No ceremony. The way she does everything. "Don't tell me what you spend it on," she said. "It's yours. It was always yours. I bought a good winter coat." I know that sounds small after $57,000, but I had wanted a real winter coat, not the sad department store one I'd had since my first year, for years. I bought one, properly fitted, down to my knees, the kind that actually keeps you warm when the wind comes off the lake. I wore it the next day. I stood at the bus stop, and for the first time in years, I wasn't cold. I think about my grandmother a lot these days. About what it means that she never once mentioned the money in those 2.5 years. Not a hint of "you're welcome," not a single expectation attached to it. She just sent it every month because she loved me and she wanted me to be warm and fed and able to focus on becoming a nurse. And then when she found out the truth, she went to a lawyer the same week. No drama, no confrontation over the phone. She gathered her evidence, consulted a professional, and waited until she had everything in order. She's 74 years old. She came to Ontario with $100 in 1974. She still uses the same cast iron pan she bought at a garage sale in 1981. And she went to a family lawyer and built a civil case against her own grandson because she believed that what was right, and money that was meant for someone belongs to that someone. I'm not in contact with my brother anymore. I've thought a lot about whether that's the right call, whether family is supposed to mean something different than what it meant in this situation. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is that every time I try to imagine forgiving someone who looked me in the eye for 2.5 years and knew I was struggling and kept taking the money, I can't get there. Maybe someday I will, but I can't yet. His wife emailed me once. She said that I should know she hadn't been aware of where the down payment money came from. I don't know if that's true. I replied that I hoped it was, and I haven't heard from her since. My grandmother and I have Sunday phone calls now. We always had them, but now we don't miss them. She asks about my patients without asking for details that aren't mine to share, and I ask about her garden and her bridge club and the butter tart recipe she still refuses to give me. Last week, she told me she'd started a new book, a memoir by a woman who'd spent 30 years as a defense lawyer, and she said it was quite something. She's a very clear writer, my grandmother said. She doesn't waste words. Like you, I said. I suppose, she said, and I could hear that she was pleased. I'm doing well now. I want to say that clearly because these stories can leave you with the impression that the person is still broken, still in the hard part. I'm not. I'm an RN at a hospital. I'm proud to work at. I have a one-bedroom apartment with a window that gets afternoon light. I have a cast iron pan, not the same one as my grandmother's, but the same brand. I have a winter coat, and I have my grandmother, who knew to the dollar what she'd sent and what I was owed, and who never once let a family dinner go by without making sure the butter tarts came out right. There are people in your life who show up for you in ways you don't even know about. And there are people who make a calculation that you're not paying attention, that you're too busy, too trusting, too overwhelmed to notice. The thing my brother forgot about is that even if I wasn't watching, she was. She was always watching. I've thought a lot about the word trust since that Easter Sunday. Not in any abstract way, just practically, concretely, the way you think about a tool that broke when you needed it most. Trust is something you extend because you have to. You can't verify everything. You can't audit the people who love you. And most of the time, that's fine. Most of the time, people are exactly who they present themselves to be. And then sometimes they're not. What my brother did wasn't a moment of weakness or a single bad decision that got out of hand. It was a system. He set it up deliberately, gave my grandmother an account number, used the right language, presented himself as the responsible one managing things on my behalf. And then he maintained that system for 2.5 years. Every month when the transfer came through, he made a choice. 30 separate times he made that choice. That's not a mistake. That's a character. I used to wonder if I should have seen it coming, if there were signs I missed. But I stopped doing that because that kind of thinking puts the weight in the wrong place. I was a nursing student working double shifts. I was trying to survive. The failure wasn't mine to catch. It was his not to commit. What I keep coming back to is my grandmother, Grandma Cecile, who came to this country with $100 and built something careful and lasting out of sheer precision and patience. She noticed because she's a bookkeeper. She noticed because she tracks things. She noticed because she has always paid attention to where her money goes. Not out of greed, but out of the kind of hard-won discipline that comes from knowing exactly what it costs to start from nothing. She didn't confront my brother in a panic. She didn't call me crying. She went to a lawyer. She organized her records. She waited until she had everything in order, and then she picked the right moment. The family dinner, the room full of witnesses, the folder already prepared on the chair beside her, and she acted. That's not luck. That's a kind of intelligence that only comes from decades of clear-eyed living. I think about that when people talk about resilience like it's a feeling, like it's about staying positive or pushing through. Resilience isn't a mood. It's a practice. It's building the kind of life where, when something goes wrong, you have enough clarity to respond rather than just react. My grandmother had that clarity. I'm still building mine. What I know for certain is this: the way you treat people when you think they aren't watching, when they're too busy, too overwhelmed, too trusting to check, that is who you are. My brother made $57,000 worth of choices while I was working overnight shifts and walking 40 minutes in -22 weather because I needed the bus fare for groceries. He knew. He kept going anyway. That catches up with you, not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, just because paper trails exist, because grandmothers pay attention, because the truth has a way of becoming undeniable when someone with 40 years of bookkeeping experience decides to look closely at her own bank statements. I'm not going to tell you I've forgiven him. I haven't. Maybe that changes eventually. Maybe it doesn't. What I can tell you is that I'm warm now. I have a coat that actually fits. I have a Sunday phone call I don't miss. And I have the proof. lived and documented that quiet, careful people who do things right and keep showing up without making noise about it are almost always the ones still standing when everything else falls apart. That's the only lesson I've got. It's enough.